Broadcasting live from SHRM 2022 at the New Orleans Convention Center, it's time for Workplace MVP, brought to you by R3 Continuum, a global leader in helping workplaces thrive during disruptive times. Now, here's your host.
Hey everyone, your host here, Jamie Gassmann at the R3 Continuum booth, our show sponsor. And we are coming to you from SHRM 2022 Exhibit Hall. And with me is Mario Pecoraro from Alliance Risk Group. Welcome to the show, Mario.
Good morning, Jamie. Thank you for having me.
So let's start out. Tell us a little bit about your background and how you became the CEO of Alliance Risk Group and all of like your expertise in what you do.
Oh, great. So thank you once again for having me. I come to the industry with a pretty unique background in that I grew up in a family-owned business, worked with my dad, who was an old-school gumshoe, old-school private investigator. And I learned at a pretty young age that I really had a strong passion for catching the bad guys, right, and doing the investigating needed to get the truth out there. So developed a strong passion probably at the age of 13, 14, was doing ride-alongs with my dad, got to learn the ropes of what an investigator does, what surveillance is, how to screen people for organizations before background screening was a thing. And so I took that strong passion and decided in 2005 that I wanted to launch my own firm, Alliance Risk Group, which was more focused on a scalable model of helping businesses reduce risk. So Alliance Risk Group was born back in 2005.
Yeah. And looking at risk and doing background checks, you have I'm sure you've got some crazy, interesting stories that HR leaders should be taking notice of. Do you have anything off the top of your mind that is most interesting where you kind of use that as your way to warn why this is so important to look into?
Yeah, so there's so many different aspects of background screening that are applicable. So when it comes to the process itself, there's a lot of regulations and rules that must be followed. And so early on in the process, most of the companies doing this tried to be as compliant as they could, but they struggled with how do you keep bad people out and reduce your risk. So through the years, a lot of laws have changed and a lot of compliance has taken place. But with that, the bad people have never really stopped, right? So people are still trying to get into organizations. So we've seen everything from people who falsified credentials, falsified resumes. We were privileged to be on ABC's 2020 about 6-7 years ago, and they did a whole story on the extent to which an applicant will go to falsify their background. And the story was all about this guy that we ended up catching that was running a diploma mill out of Ohio. And by day, he was a factory worker. By night, he ran a diploma mill. So if you wanted to graduate from the Rye University, you let him know. You tell him the year of graduation. He'd create a nice diploma. And basically, he did this for several people who were struggling. So we were able to catch this on several people.
Wow. That's why I love doing this show. You always learn something new. I would have never thought that somebody would actually do that. That's interesting.
Yeah, for sure. So people go to all extents to try to get a job. And so besides references and diplomas, you also get into credentials, right? So let's just say they were at one point, they needed to have a credential of, say, a manager or director level in the past job. A lot of employers may not verify a past employment. So they're going to go out and say that they were a director at, we'll use the example of IMED, a booth across the street. Well, who's really going to verify that the person was a director at IMED? And, let's just say that they didn't even work there. If that's not verified, that becomes an integrity issue. So a lot of employees try to falsify things in order to justify the position they're trying to get.
Yeah. And so in looking at that, so they falsify the record of their resume or their background. What kind of risk does that put the company at in hiring somebody that's done that?
Yeah, so a lot of companies right now, so the risk that puts them into is a number of risks. So first of all, from a negligent hiring perspective, if they bring somebody into the workplace that should not have been brought in, whether it's because of a violent background or a false resume, they face potential of a really significant civil liability. Not to mention the brand reputation that goes into that, right? So if they make a bad hire and now something bad happens and that hits the press, that has a huge impact on the company's brand overall and its ability to stay, in a positive light in the community. So it could have a significant effect, not to mention the fact that if someone has a violent history and they're able to get into an organization, we've all seen way too often the number of cases where there's workplace violence incidents that happen literally every day, where people go back to a job and, they commit a violent act, not realizing that maybe a little bit of due diligence could have prevented that person from being brought on.
Yeah. And now you are speaking at SHRM this year.
I am.
So talk to me about what are you speaking on?
So having been in the industry my entire professional career, I'm very passionate about ensuring that best practices are followed and open in HR and talent acquisition leaders' eyes as to not to take shortcuts in order to bring talent in the organization. So today's topic is actually one around the Fair Credit Reporting Act, often termed as FCRA, and some lawsuits that have happened in our industry where failure to follow due process, the proper best practices, have resulted in millions of dollars in lawsuits and payouts, as well as EEOC violations where there's been discrimination. There's also a big issue here with discrimination against people with criminal records that haven't been given the opportunity for proper due process.
Yeah. So if there were like 3 takeaways you want your audience to have when they walk out of the room after your presentation, what would those be?
So the first takeaway is, there's no shortcut to due process and due diligence. A lot of times, with technology, people think, with AI, we can get instant background checks and get results quickly. That's partially true. But if you don't do a thorough enough job, you could open the risk of potentially getting sued. The second takeaway that I'd like to ensure people walk away with is just reviewing their process, right? If the process has not been reviewed in a while, just make sure that they're following the latest best practices to reduce risk. And the third is that it's very easy to get sued today. So be aware of what can happen to keep yourself out of that potential lawsuit.
Yeah. Great advice for right now, especially with some employers getting a little desperate for staffing.
Very challenging these days, for sure.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, thank you so much for being on our show. If somebody wanted to get a hold of you to learn a little bit more, kind of, ask some more questions about things they could be doing differently in their organization, how would they go about doing that? So they could reach me. I'm on LinkedIn, Mario Pecoraro. You can email me, mpecoraro, that's PECORARO, at Alliance Risk Group. You can also reach me on Twitter, at Mario, AWIG. And of course, if you Google me, you'll find me as well, probably in a positive light, not negative one. Wonderful. Well, thanks again for being on the show. It's been great chatting with you.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us on Workplace MVP. R3 Continuum is a proud sponsor of this show and is delighted to celebrate most valuable professionals who work diligently to secure safe workplaces where employees can thrive.